Hi everyone, we are here today for our resource room catch-up session, and we've got some lovely folks here on the session with me, and if you weren't able to make it, never fear, because we are recording for you. So today we're going to have a little look at an overview of explicit morphology instruction across the primary school. Now this is absolutely a Kentucky tour, not going to get into details around things, but know that there is help along the way, and there'll be further instructional resources for you. There's already an overview of instruction for year 3, 4 and 5, 6, which is step by step and has examples and explanations and things. But let's get started here. So just to recap, morphemes are the smallest units of meaning in words. Prefixes come before a base, bases are built upon, and suffixes come after a base. You can have more than one suffix in a word. So if we take the word prescription, pre means before, script means to write, and that ION makes it a noun. So it's a thing that was written before. And when you go to the chemist, you take your prescription and you get your medication. So the teaching of morphology is supported by the curriculum, as well as a really robust body of research. So we're not stumbling around in the dark in terms of whether we should teach this. Children come to school with a well-developed sense of morphological awareness in their speech, and our job is to make the connection to written language for decoding, reading comprehension, spelling, and written expression. And so that's the role of us as teachers in bringing children's awareness to the morphology in written text. Now, how do we do that though, is a little trickier to pin down. So I've turned to Carlisle's 2010 analysis of a number of morphological interventions. There were 17, if I'm remembering correctly. And if I'm not, I apologize, but yeah, there were a number of them. And they had a look at the common features of the effective morphological interventions, and these were 4 of them. So drawing students' attention to the internal structure of the word, so breaking words into morphemes, teaching meanings of prefixes and suffixes, helping students to understand how morphemes contributed to the word's meaning or grammatical form. And by grammatical form, we're talking about how that helped the word become a noun or a verb or an adverb or an adjective. Helping students use morphemes to understand the meaning of unfamiliar words. So it's part of that whole, let's sort of be word detectives thing, where when we know about the meanings of the morphemes, we can use the context of the sentence around the word, we can use all of that to figure out the meaning of the word, so we can comprehend the text we're reading. Further, it suggested that instruction in affixes in one-off lessons does not yield long-term results. And I don't think that will be a surprise to any of us. A one and done really gets us to the finish line. So rather, it's a repeated exposure to the use of an affix that helps children embed things into long-term memory. So while some of the resources inside the resource room are kind of those standalone lessons, there is no intention that that is the end of the instruction in a particular morpheme, and you'll see what I mean as we go through. Now, we don't plan morphology instruction in the same way as we do for phonics. There's not an established set, scope and sequence. Morphology works differently from phonics in that there are meaning components, and I agree with people when they say that if we were to only work with a scope and sequence and that's all we do, then we would be losing a really important, impactful part of the picture. So for my money, there are 3 areas in which, 3 main ways, I guess, in which we can address morphology. I think there is an argument to be made for structured, systematic instruction. The reality is that we don't exist as an island. As a teacher, we are part of a school and part of a system. And, I mean the system of the school. So a year 3 teacher, really it's unhelpful to have to go on a journey of discovery and do 4 weeks worth of diagnostic investigation and examine the data and do all the things to find out where every child's up to, and then combine all of that to coordinate some sort of, that just seems to be, adding another layer of complexity for teachers and students. That's really, I think are necessary. So if we have a little bit of a scope and sequence or a fundamental understanding and common agreement around what we might look at in each grade, then each teacher can have some degree of certainty that these things have been covered. The second area is as part of a content area learning program. So whether that's science or HASS or through rich text in our English lessons, we're going to touch on morphology because they're a gateway to spelling and comprehension and writing. But then also I think it's lovely to leave time for and room for teachable moments. So if you come across an interesting word, be able to put it up on our interesting word board, and then, you know, once a fortnight say, well, we're going to be word detectives today. Let's vote on a word that we might want to explore, and you go into its history, particularly in the upper primary. You know, let's get on Etom Online and have a look, or whatever it happens to be. So leaving room for all three of these things I think is important, and it helps really bring home the point of morphology, which is, yes, it's about spelling, but it's also about meaning. And after all, that's what we're all here for. But today, what we're going to look at in terms of that overview is box number 1, the structured and systematic approach. Now, while there isn't a set scope and sequence, there are sensible ways to organise content, I think, that respond to the frequency of morphemes. There's no point teaching, you know, some sort of random, well, they wouldn't be random, would it? But some morpheme that we're only going to see when we get to university. So we want to be teaching the morphemes that are going to be the most impactful for students. It's good to look at curriculum expectations as well. So what are we learning in HASS and science and other areas that may contain particular vocabulary? We could connect or align our morphology instruction with that content area teaching. Examining the kinds of words that will be most helpful. So when I was putting together my suggestion for content across the school, I looked at, okay, what sort of word lists are we coming up with here? If there's only 3 words out of 20 that would be, you know, really useful and have great utility for students, I said, well, no, let's leave it. And then the transparency of words comes into things as well. So if we're going to be teaching particular suffixing conventions, it's much easier to teach the ED because inform becomes informed. The pronunciation and the spelling and the meaning are all connected, but music to musician, there is a spelling implication, but then there's also a pronunciation issue. And so we sort of have these layers of complexity. So we want to be conscious of that as well. So we're not bamboozling our little people. So there is in the resource room an overview of morphology content. Now it is a suggestion. I'm not claiming it is the definitive scope and sequence for morphology. Nobody can say that. But I've looked at the Australian curriculum. I've looked at several studies of the most common and most useful morphemes. I've looked at the writings of lots of people like Louisa Moats and William Van Cleve, and just really tried to cross-reference as much as I could to make some suggestions for what might be a useful way to organise content.